I was 15 years old when I landed my first legit job, and it was basically working as a doughboy for a local pizza store. And the crazy part was I was working with a guy twice my age who had schizophrenia, and I had no idea about that. And also, I didn't know what that was. And this is already part two. So in part one, I talk about it in general, how it was like. But if you haven't watched that, it's going to be on my channel if you click. But in this one, I'm going to talk more in depth of, some of those experiences. And this is not going to be a funny video. This isn't for jokes. I know, as kids, we found a lot of things funny. But because I got to see this firsthand before even knowing that it was a thing, schizophrenia, that it's a thing, it was genuinely scary, but not scary for me, but scary for somebody that has that life, basically because you can't get away from it. And so the first thing is, working alongside this guy, it was insanely convincing how he was talking to another person in his head. Obviously, what doctors would say, it's all auditory hallucinations, sometimes even visual. And I know for a fact this guy had auditory hallucinations because it was always like he's talking to another person. And here's the interesting thing. Stress was the amplifier. So what I mean by that is when the day starts, let's say we're working a Friday rush and it's evening time, everybody's ordering pizza, but we just make the dough, so we're not even on the front line. We just have to make sure there's enough dough in stock. And it starts off super chill. He'll come in there, sometimes his, I don't know what to call it, the shadow he's talking to is funny. So it's not even always a bad thing, but it's still there, so that can be a bad thing. And he's making jokes with this person he's talking to, he's laughing under his breath, but all of this is happening very quietly. Like, I can see his head move in ways as if he's almost on a call. It's like as if he has an earpiece in and he's on a call, talking to someone, responding, laughing, and sometimes even turning to me and being like, can you believe this guy? Did you hear what he said? And he'll tell me the joke and I'll laugh along. But I never paid attention too much. I just thought this guy likes talking to himself out loud. That's what I thought, having no idea that this guy has schizophrenia. I just had no idea. So I just thought he's talking to himself. And I was like, I don't mind, I don't care. And the only thing is, once it got busier and this guy already started to want to go home, he's tired and there's stress, as in like, hey, we can't leave until the dough is fully stocked so that they don't run out of dough. And we'd have to stay longer sometimes. And that's when it got crazy, because those little mutters or him whispering under his breath, it became louder and louder, and to where it was fully audible, and sometimes turned into shouting as the shift progressed. And it went from a positive conversation where the shadow figure he's talking to was making him laugh, or the voices he heard, to where he was arguing. And sometimes those arguments would get very heated. And the thing is, I can't hear whatever his brain is telling him, but I can hear him replying. And very often it would get very, very bad, like aggressive. And he's never put me in danger. But yes, one of the tools we use is a knife, and I've talked about that in a previous video, but pretty much the only tool we use is just the knife to cut dough. And he always had the knife in his hand because he was mostly cutting the dough and I was doing the other stuff. I was rolling it and such. And he would often swing his knife at the corner. There was a corner with a door to the outside. It was like a back exit. And he would always turn to it just in the middle of doing something. Even sometimes he's having a conversation with me, he'll get distracted and turn over to the corner and start swinging his knife and being like, stop it, enough, like, leave me alone, that kind of thing. And it was shouting very loudly, and he would stomp, and it's very convincing. It was so convincing that it made me feel like I'm the one that's not seeing something. I thought I'm the crazy one, and there's actually 3 of us here, and I'm just not seeing it, because I shit you not, how powerful the brain is. Like, a person who is undergoing that, it's so powerful that it convinces other people in the room, like myself, that there's actually someone I'm supposed to be seeing. I mean, it's not just, someone tripping out. Like, you see a person who took some edibles and they're, whoa, bro, I'm tripping out. It's not like that at all. It's, the tonality the like his anger or his frustration more so, and the fact that he's reacting. He's making gestures. I'm not even talking just about swinging the knife, but like like looking over, like giving somebody a stare. Sometimes it would just be that, like he'd be listening, that this guy's or whoever, his head, the voices are saying something nasty to him, and he'll like turn and give them a stare, like like the one that tells you to like shut up, enough already. And often I'd look that way. Obviously, there's nobody there, but I'd be like, it's so realistic. It's almost like, and I would have crazy thoughts like, what if he's seeing something I'm not? What if that's not just in his head? What if he can see another dimension that we're just not seeing? How, I also watched a lot of scary movies at the time. How, this kid can see things adults can't see, But in this case, I thought, what if he's seeing that stuff? And then, over time, yeah, somebody told me this guy actually has schizophrenia, and I had no idea what that is again. So I went online and looked it up and saw a bunch of videos of how, what it is and how people act. And I was like, yes, this is it. This is actually what my guy right here is going through. And he was absolutely chill. Like, he was awesome. He just liked to enjoy his weekends after work. He liked his pizza. He liked his pop drinks. He goes home, watches Star Trek, I think Star Trek or Star Wars. You don't hate me for this. I never watched the series, but it's one of those. He watched one of those. I think it was Star Trek. And he was very chill otherwise. He never ever said anything mean or bad to me. He never shouted at me either. None of that. And as a 15-year-old kid, considering this guy is not only twice my age, he's twice my size. He's just huge. He's absolutely huge. And yeah, I just kind of thought this was normal for a while because, once again, I've never actually worked a job, so I just thought this is how adults are, or someone who is not a parent but just an older version of you. I thought this is normal until it was clearly evident that no, they're actually trying to deal with something, but sometimes it's too difficult. And then, on the other hand, I kind of put myself into his shoes thinking, imagine trying to work and lead a normal life while also constantly having your brain be active. You know how we all have an internal monologue? We all think to ourselves in our heads. Well, this isn't thoughts. This is basically like a whole conversation happening 24/7, like ongoing. He can't sleep properly because something is tormenting him. And I thought, all right, imagine, somebody's always talking to you and somebody's always distracting you. Sometimes, most of the time, they're saying nasty things. And yeah, I kind of forgot where I was going with this. Oh yeah, the fact that leading a normal life, what I mean by that is, let's say he's explaining something to me, because he's also the guy that trained me, he was senior over me, so he'd explain something to me, he'll be having a conversation, and then I can see that his eyes are going elsewhere and he's being distracted. And I know this, and I'm just like waiting for him to regain his focus. But it's felt literally like, imagine you're talking to a person and a third voice gets his attention, so he looks over, and normally you'd see the third person and you'd be like, all right, yeah, somebody's getting his attention. But in this case, it was nobody. And you just had to understand that. But he would get distracted so often, and he would reply. He'd be like, he'd talk to the other person, or sometimes he'd be like, hold on, don't you see I'm talking? Like, wait, just stop it, enough already. Let me finish my conversation. Then he'll get back to it. Yeah, where were we? And that happened very commonly when talking to him. Now, a completely different thing, which was interesting, because this was interfering with this guy's life, it was bleeding into his real life, whatever was inside his brain. Some of the things he said were not very coherent, if you know what I mean. For example, I'll give a good example. So, just to make sense, how the job worked is you have to get a batch of dough started that the machine spins around, makes it into dough, all the ingredients, and it takes about 15 minutes. But while that's happening, we are making the current batch, as in we're cutting up the dough, stretching it, and putting it away. So as soon as we're done that, the next batch is ready. So we never have nothing to do, which is very important to maintain that flow. And sometimes I ask him, okay, because he's my superior, he's my senior, should we make whole wheat? because I was responsible for putting in the ingredients. Are we making whole wheat this time or white flour? And he'll be like, he'll think about it, he'll come back to it. He'll ask whoever else in his head, what should we do? And the weirdest answer he'd give sometimes, he'll be like, it just depends on the weather. And in my mind, I'm like, I'm just like waiting for a better answer. I'm like, okay, what do you mean? It depends on the weather? He's like, yeah, like, don't you feel like, selecting the type of dough, it's more to do with the clouds. Like if it's a cloudy day or if it's like sunny out. And, I never like ridiculed him or told him that he sounds insane. I was just like, I was genuinely confused and I was like, okay, well, can you elaborate? Like, what do you mean? And, he'll be like, forget about it. You won't get it. Whatever. It's fine. And then he would just give me no answer. And I'm like, so which dough? He's like, just hold on. It's fine. It doesn't matter. And I'm like, all right. I didn't argue. I was like, all right, whatever. I guess we'll just finish what we're doing. And then guess what happens? We finish the current batch of dough, put everything away. And now we have a gap. Because the new dough isn't prepared, because I never loaded it, because I never really got an answer, we're like, oh, what do we do now? It's empty. It's not like we can just go and take a break, especially for 15 minutes. And he'd look over, oh, we never put on the dough? And I was like, no, we didn't. You told me to just hold on. He's like, I did? I told you to wait? Why? Sometimes he'll fully come down to it and he'll be like, why did we not do it? I was like, I don't know. Like, I guess we just didn't decide. I just kind of, I was on his side and I was like, we just never decided and we never made it. And he's like, oh shit, that's not good. All right. Yeah, just throw on the whole wheat. And then he went out, for a little break. And I was like, all right. But these kind of things, they interfere. And, that doesn't look so good in general because if the manager's there and she'd be looking like, what are you guys doing? You're doing nothing because there's nothing to do because the batch is not ready. The dough is not mixed, so you have to wait for that. And sometimes, depending on what it is, it could take 30 minutes. And yeah, so it's very interesting how this can affect your tasks, which means, imagine it's a different job, like any other job, especially that requires responsibility. You cannot be getting distracted like this. And it was pretty hard for him to hold down this job without that, because ultimately he did get fired because his symptoms got worse and worse and worse to where it became like just a safety issue. But I felt safe. I was fine. He never said anything to me, but it wasn't good when you have a guy shouting in the back of the room because customers in the front can hear some guy shouting and you can't explain to everyone what's going on, And the rest of the staff treated him very well. They were all like very understanding. They're like, hey, how's your shit? How's your health? How's everything? Now, this is work stuff. But on the other side, which is at home, he did not talk about his personal life at all, like very rarely. But in the times he did, he would say things like, don't you feel like they're out to get you? And I'd be like, oh, what do you mean? Like, he's like, oh, what am I talking? You're a kid. You don't pay taxes yet. I was like, okay. He's like, yeah, the tax man. He's like outside my door half the time. That was my headset. He's outside the door half the time. And I was like, tax man? What do you mean? They come to collect your taxes? He's like, I think so, but I never let him in. I hear him knocking, but he doesn't come in. All right. And then other times he tell me, I close all my blinds. I lock everything up because I can't risk being stalked. I think they're out to get me. And I'll just generally be interested because as a kid I don't even understand a lot of things. Maybe the things he's talking about is true, or maybe it's his it's in his head. I was genuinely interested. I was like, okay, so who are they? Because you keep saying they're out to get you, and he'll be like, well, it's them. It's the government. Okay, it's the insurance company. It's the tax man. Sometimes it's the bad guys. They're trying to rob you. Sometimes it's the landlord. And he'll run through all the scenarios. He'll be like, yeah, so I make sure I always lock up. Everything's closed. And yeah, but sometimes you can hear them right outside the door. And sometimes they peek and there's always this car parked. And again, maybe it's true. Maybe it's just the neighbor's car and they're always parked there. But he'll tell me these stories and I realize he has to live with this. I might just see him for a shift at work. But this guy has to live with it every single day. And even when he's chilling on the couch watching Star Trek, Just imagine for a second, you're doing whatever relaxation activity you like to do, and you hear somebody like banging on your window and nobody's there. Or maybe if you also have the visuals, then you think somebody's there. And somebody's knocking on the door. You hear people are out talking about you, they're trying to get you. And he always talks about it like, and one time he came in, he was so panicked. He's like, oh my God, they almost got me. I made it in now. And he's like looking out the window, from the pizza place. He's like, okay, I think they're gone. I think I'm safe. And I was like, okay, you're good, bro. Like, cool. It's no one's here. I think the car's left. Like, yeah, okay, we're safe. All right. And he'd be off course on medication that also helps keep it down, but sometimes I guess it wasn't working that well. But yeah, it was quite the experience, and most of it was it was very real. That's the biggest thing I can say. It was so real that I thought I was the crazy one most of the time. I know I've said that before, but I shit you not, like, going through my life, maybe a lot of people haven't ever seen this, because people who are suffering from this cannot really work a lot of times. Some can, some can't. Everybody's symptoms are different, but I've never ever met another person with this condition ever. So I know a lot of us go through life never actually seeing that, and seeing that in person is so insane. It's the most realistic thing ever of how they act and how they are, while it's completely in their heads. Like, that's how powerful our brains are, that it can generate all these images, sounds, and whatever, and you can't turn it off. The worst part, you cannot turn it off. There is no off button. There's no magic pill that's going to make it all go away. Yes, there are suppressants. I don't exactly know what they are. This isn't medical observation. This is purely an observation from a 15-year-old kid who doesn't really know anything. That's what I was at the time. But of course, as I got older, I'm 26 now, and I realized, okay, that shit is crazy, and a lot more people have all kinds of problems than we even realize. It's just, as kids, we don't really know, because we think everyone's just normal. The normal. Everyone has two parents. Everybody is relatively healthy. Everything is okay, because those people usually aren't as present in society because we don't see them. But sometimes, they are, and it shows you what a life they lead and makes you grateful for the fact that you don't have it. So, yeah, absolutely crazy experience. Thanks for watching, guys.